Fires one towards the goal. That's going to be gloved by Travis Ridgen. Well, this is more like it.
This is Slangin The Bizkit. Here's Travis Ridgen and Dave Wheeler.
Ladies and gentlemen, lads and ladies, welcome back with Slangin The Bizkit as a part of our summer interview series. Today's guest is a one-time NHL All-Star, over 400 NHL games played, finished with about a .918 save percentage, one of the greater of all times, if I'm correct on that. Over 100 American League games in our hometown here in downtown Winnipeg, wearing one of the greatest logos, greatest colors, greatest jerseys of all time for the Manitoba Moose. He's now a father, husband, and host on NHL Network. His podcast is also called One-Time NHL All-Stars. Welcome to Slangin The Bizkit, Cory Schneider.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me.
And a hell of a knife thrower, if I might point out.
Hell of a what? Knife thrower, yes. You know what's funny is the last 2 years for Jill's birthday, we've gone axe throwing for her birthday. So
I hope you thought of me every single time you threw one, because it started on the back of my kitchen door.
It sure did. I will never forget how to not throw a knife now because of you.
Do you want to retell that story? That was a legendary one that you told in one of the first episodes we were doing together, Dave.
My wife and I had just moved in together. Cory was over. We were solving the world's problems, and it seemed like a good idea to throw kitchen knives at the back of my kitchen door, and that's pretty much the short and tall of it.
He taught me the technique, and I kind of looked at them and be like, "You guys sure about this, right? I can throw a knife at your door." And they're like, "Yeah, go for it." And I was like, "All right." You said I could. It's like a kid when they ask their parents for permission. Like, "Can I?" You're like, "Yeah." They're like, "All right."
We always had plans of renovating. We thought that'd be a good start. Why don't we just destroy everything in it first?
Yes, exactly. Well, if you haven't been axe throwing, go do that. That's very cathartic.
I believe it. Very, very Thor style.
Yeah.
So listen, just to set everything up, Cory and I met, I would say 2007, 2008, somewhere in that realm.
Yeah.
Just before you made your jump over to the Vancouver Canucks, and have had a friendship ever since then. And Travis, this is your and Cory's first interaction together, but both of you being goaltenders, I'm sure you already have some sort of psychic connection between the two of you.
Goalie union, stay strong. It's like the Force, you know. It's just you have those mind tricks with each other, so we get it.
Is your hip twitching too? Mine's kind of twitching. I feel that. We both had the same surgery, so.
I was gonna say mine just hurts, but yeah, it might be twitching. Can't tell these days.
I heard that's a thing though. I heard once a lot of the bigger guys get their hips fixed, after a certain period of time, it starts to kind of feel back to the way that it was. So maybe that's why we have that connection.
You got the itch again. That's what that is.
The Demko, the Brossois, the Murray, the Schneider, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it's like Tommy John for goalies.
Well, let me ask both of you this question just to kind of break the ice here. When it comes to these kind of surgeries, and Cory, I know you and I had this conversation. I've subsequently had it with Travis, but the guy to blame for all of this is somewhere between Patrick Waugh and Marty Brodeur for introducing this butterfly style, would it not be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's definitely because of the butterfly. I don't think God intended people's knees and hips to turn that direction hundreds of times a day in practice and games. And eventually, most guys, you're blessed if you don't have hip injuries or hip issues after a long career. But the way that those limbs move is not natural. So I think eventually something's got to give. But yeah, I mean, it's fortunately I got it later in my career. I know a lot of guys get it early on. Like you mentioned Demko. I think he had double hip surgery in college. But a lot of it too is the overuse. A lot of these kids now they're banging away in butterfly from age 7 until they turn pro forever, and they don't do other sports. They don't do a lot of other activities to help counteract that. So I think I was lucky. I played 3 sports up until college and took some time off the ice, even when I got older. So, it still got me, but not till I was 33 and not 23.
I was going to say, you were a little bit, would you say you consider yourself old when you had it done? Because I mean, you were what, 26?
I was 33 when I got it done because it was 2019 or 2018, I believe. So that was 32. Yeah, I would have been 32 years old when I got it done.
What were your symptoms? What were you feeling like at the time? Like right leading up to the surgery? Was it like, I need this, or?
Yeah, it's funny because, my hip it wouldn't hurt all the time directly. Like sometimes I'd get pain in my groin, I get pain in my lower abdomen, and I couldn't figure it out. And I actually had a what's it called, a adductor release, because I was having this groin pain, but I couldn't figure. You'd push on the groin, it wouldn't hurt, but my groin would hurt. And so they do this thing called an adductor release, where they basically go in and fillet your groin to sort of release the swelling and the pressure. So I got that done, and it was about 6-week recovery in the summer. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it wasn't awesome. And then, I still had groin issues. And again, my lower abdomen, if you picture doing like a plank where you lift your feet up off the ground, just like searing pain. And eventually we figured out that, the hip was slightly torn, but you don't want to miss time, right? You don't want to sit out. You don't want to get left behind. So I got a couple of injections, cortisone shots that, yeah, they control the pain, but they don't mask, they mask the symptoms, but not the issue. So once those wore off, it was if you picture like sitting at your stall and trying to bend down to clip your heel buckle or something like that, like I could barely do that. Like the pinch was so bad. I almost, getting on the ice was harder than being on the ice. And, they're taking the trainer and they do the internal rotation. My right leg, my good leg was about 30 degrees of rotation. My left leg got to about 5 and just stopped. So basically it would just hit a point where, it would just stop because you have some bone growth that gets caught. So long medical story of saying like it would just at night it would be shooting pains down my legs in bed after games, and there'd be movements in the game where I'd catch it and it would just, it's almost like a stinger, like it just hurts for 30 or 50 seconds and just sort of shooting pain, and then it goes away for a little bit. So it got to the point where the doc, we kept checking in on it. Finally he's like, yeah, we got to get this thing fixed. And sure enough, it was close to being where it was bone on bone, and then you can't really fix it. You got to get either the resurfacing or a hip replacement. So I caught mine early enough, relatively, but yeah, it was not going away anytime soon.
I know tying the skates is a little bit of a pain in the ass, but like doing the toe ties, like getting all the way down, that was when it was like you gotta like shimmy around like this, like oh, I got one, and then you gotta get the other one, and you gotta kind of reach around. Oh, it was a nightmare to try to get those all on.
Yeah, so you know that feeling then.
Yeah, it's tricky, especially like the middle of the night. Like let's say like you go to bed 11:30, like midnight after a game, and then it's like 1:30. You're like, oh, I gotta like roll my hip, I gotta roll my groin, I gotta roll the calf, I gotta shimmy up on the bathroom sink. It's a project and a half.
It is. So it just kind of gets worse and worse, and you sort of you forget what it's like to not be in pain. I think that's the thing. You get so used to it, you just deal with it, and you forgot what it was like to not have that sensation. So once you get it fixed, it's it's a crappy recovery and rehab and all that. But then once it gets better, you're like, oh, this is way better than what I was doing before. Why didn't I do this longer or before this?
As somebody who's a fan of science, I mean, honestly, at this point, when it comes to Major League Baseball prospects, when they're 18, get them in for Tommy John surgery. When it comes to goaltenders, is get their hip surgery done, 1 and 2 and both. I mean, get it done, and then you can enjoy your career after that.
Yeah, I mean, I always picture the baseball guys like Rookie of the Year and Henry Rowengartner. Just you wind the arm up and torque it up and just throw 100 miles an hour for the rest of your career. Yeah, I mean, some kids like proactively do it if they have it, because sometimes you have tears, but they're not symptomatic. So they'll look at it if there is some tearing. Every NHL, every hockey player probably, if you looked at your hips from you playing, like you probably have some small tears in there, but if they don't cause you any pain, they're not going to go in there and fix it. But nowadays, like you said, it's like almost they go in there if they see some tearing, they're like, hey, you know what? Even though it doesn't hurt you yet, we're going to go in and fix it up so that way it doesn't hurt you down the line. So I think some guys have resorted to that, and it's not great. It's not something you want to be doing all the time, but got me through the end of my career, and it feels good now. So but you see your guys like Kaner and Nick Backstrom, and those guys are having the full resurface where they literally shave your hip bone and put a metal cap on it. Like that might catch up to you when you're 50 or 60 and affect your quality of life.
Well, listen, I know Travis has a whole bunch of goaltender-related questions, and I can't wait to honestly be a fly on the wall for all of that. But you talked about your retirement. I said this before we started the show, man, but I couldn't be prouder to see you make the transition that you did, because to pull the curtain back a little bit, there's more players in any sport who start thinking about that, what's my next step going to be after retirement, and where that falls in line as far as when they're still playing. Some comes earlier than others. I think, knowing you as long as I have, I think that may have always been an option. It's never something you said out loud, but when you announced it that you were going to be going and working with NHL Network and doing your own podcast, to me, I just went, oh yeah, well, that makes total sense. But at what point did you realize, okay, this is what I'm going to go towards?
You know what? It wasn't necessarily a conscious decision. Some guys lay some groundwork before they retire. They make connections. They have things lined up with the team or with, something outside of hockey. I think the biggest question is, am I going to stay in the game of hockey or go do something else completely? Because, one of my buddies said it best when he retired. It's like, if you go to a financial company, like, where's your resume, and you give them your hockey DB stats, you're like, here's my resume. This is what I've been doing for the last 15 years. Like, you don't have a workable resume. So it's like, all right, you're going to start an entry-level position. You're going to do this, this, and this. So depending on where you are in your life and where you've done, what you've done financially, yeah, it's like, all right, I could go maybe work for UBS and earn a little bit of money, but I'd be in the city from 9 to 5 for 5 days a week. Is that something I want to do after I was just gone and traveling and doing my thing for so long? So I think that factored in for me. And the media stuff, more offers came from media than anything else. I had more interest from networks and things like that along the way. So I think, hopefully, as you said, you put in the equity during your career. Are you a good interview? Are you articulate? Can you speak well? How have you done in front of the? I did some stints, on NBC with the NHL stuff when I was playing, and it went well. So fortunately, that stuck in people's minds, and they looked at me as a viable media option. But some guys get approached by the teams like, hey, do you want to come scout or be in the front office or join the coaching staff? So it's all kind of different of how you're viewed. And I didn't really have a plan necessarily. I was blessed to make enough money where I didn't have to go do something right away. And I think when you're doing this for 15, 16 years, your family gives up a lot for you to go do what you love doing. So I think it was, this year was sort of like a bridge year for me where, I could go do NHL Network. I did a few Islanders games part-time just to get the experience, just to get the exposure, but it wasn't like a full-time gig where I was in 5-6 days a week or working long hours. It was like, all right, I can do, 6 to 10 nights a month and still be home and do pickups and drop-offs and, go to the kids' events and just be there for my family because they've, like I said, they've always been there for me. So I think this year was a bit of a bridge year, and I've enjoyed it. I've really liked the NHL Network stuff. I've enjoyed the Islanders games. The podcast has been fun. Me and Brian Boyle go way back, so it's basically us just playing grab ass and talking hockey. So again, who knows if that's the path, forever going forward. It's been good for this year, but now it's, we got to sit down together as a family and just sort of figure out what's our path. We have enough to live off of for now and live a comfortable life, but do we want more? What do we want to do to stay stimulated? How do we want to keep yourself busy? Because I think the hardest part for guys who retire is, what's that purpose? Like every day you wake up and you got to go to the rink to go do something that had a purpose to it. And now it's kind of like, oh, I guess I just don't really have to be anywhere that often. So it's a big adjustment and just being fulfilled and all that. So, again, I've been really happy with it. I'm glad to have the time off because you just constantly have your head down going for so long. It's nice to sort of take a step back and get some things done or do some things you never really had time to do. So that's a long way of saying it. It's been a good transition.
I got a question for you, Schneitz, and this is something that's kind of inspired by Dave. You mentioned like having a purpose and having something you're working towards. Like Dave is always working on new podcasts or new business endeavors. Like I don't think the guy sits still, let alone sleeps. Like obviously, like I'm the youngest of all three of us. I mean, you're late 30s, Dave's mid 40s. I'm late mid 20s. Like finding that like that masculine pursuit of like achievement of like working towards becoming a better goaltender, like on the NHL Network or the podcast, like all the stuff that you're doing. Like those are all things that like they're so important to like fulfill you and not keep you in a rut. I'm curious, like is that something you knew right away or something you had to kind of like figure out through doing different avenues business wise?
Yeah, I've tried to kick the tires. I've had some different conversations with other people in other industries, just to sort of explore what else is out there. I was a finance major in college. My dad was a strategic consultant. My mom was in education. So, I've sort of been brought up and learned other things that I enjoy doing. I like the business side of things. I like, finances. Those things interest me. So, I just didn't want to, because again, once you're in hockey, that's kind of what you're doing. And so, I wanted to make sure that, and not to say that that's not a possibility to do something different down the road. And again, my wife, she's put her life aside and her career aside to, support me in my endeavors. So it's also, hey, is there something you want to get started with or you want to work on while I sort of take the load or, do that part of it. So it's a bit of a give and take. And to your point though, it's from the age of, let's say 15, where, maybe I could have done something with hockey. That's 23 years of my life where I've known exactly what I was going to do almost every day. And then you come to a point where it's like, I don't really know what I'm going to do today. And it's a liberating feeling, but it's also kind of a weird feeling where you're kind of like, I feel like I should be doing something, like, why am I not, what's there to do? Or if I don't get something done, it's like, did I accomplish something today? So it's a unique feeling as an ex-athlete, as you said, but also an exciting feeling because you're not tethered to one thing. You're not pigeonholed into this life and this schedule. You get to go kind of do and explore whatever you want, which, is exciting, but also kind of scary because you don't know, what if the NHL Network shuts down tomorrow? It's like, okay, well now what? Or, it's the podcast fizzles out and it's like, all right, well, I guess I got to go figure something else out. So it's, like I said, an exciting and yet kind of scary thing at the same time because you've always known what you were going to do for so long. And now that safety net's kind of gone.
Well, and Dave and I were talking about this before we were making notes for the show, and maybe we can put this in now instead of like towards the end, Dave. But like your post-retirement, you had to have been thinking for a long time. Okay, I have X amount of time playing. Okay, I have to put aside X amount of dollars. Okay, I need to be thinking about what do I want to do post-retirement? Is it media? Is it podcasting? Is it business? You're a smart guy. I know one of the stories Dave was telling me like a long time ago.
May I? Let me tell you this one.
So, yes, you were there. I wasn't.
And Cory, I know you remember this, but you and Jill, I think, had just started dating. Candace and I had just moved in together. We were staying at my place in St. James. I think you were coming in town. I may get the details of this wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had to come back to Manitoba before you went back to Vancouver in training camp for logistical reasons. Stayed at my place, and I've told this story very veiled, but the fact that in the transition of all that, here's the deal that's getting signed and whatnot, you kind of knew what the numbers were. It wasn't the first thing wasn't, okay, where are we going to party or what am I going to buy? It was, I'm on my phone with my financial advisor, and it was, what do I need to put away to make sure that I'm okay until the end of my life?
Yeah.
And that was one thing that always impressed me about you was your Ivy League mentality of making sure, because it's a very small percentage of guys that realize that this may end tomorrow or it may go on for 15 years, and no one really knows that answer. Most guys think the latter, but it's the guys that really think this could end tomorrow. I got to make sure I'm okay, and I give you all the credit because you are in a minority in that category.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll have to give the credit to my Swiss father, who was very shrewd and conservative, and it was always, he worked hard in his life and he made a good amount of money, but he was always very careful about it. He never lived outside of his means or got flashy things, maybe a couple here and there, but as an upbringing, we never had more than we needed in that sense. So I think he taught my brother and I both like how to live conservatively if we have to, and just get what we need and want, and enjoy the rest. But that's a good memory because I think I was supposed to be on the team that year. They're like, you're the backup. So Jill and I, good memory, had just started dating. So she's visiting me in Vancouver, and literally at the end of training camp, out of nowhere, they're like, hey, we're gonna have to send you down on paper for a day or two just for like cap reasons or the roster, and once the roster's set, then we're going to call you back up. It's not a big deal. You're not going to Manitoba. You just have to go and get on a plane. But, my girlfriend's visiting me for like 4 more days. So it's like, okay, well, now what? I'm not going to leave you here in Vancouver. So we got her a ticket and she hopped on with me. And fortunately enough, I met up with these guys and was able to hang with them. And it's, the financial advisor, it's a huge part of an athlete's life. I mean, I think you guys know this, but a lot of people, your career earnings kind of go up as you get older, right? You start low and then you build and build, and then hopefully you hit a level that you maintain as you increase into your later life. Hockey and sports, it's you start up here and you slowly you might go up, but then you have a precipitous drop off at the age of 35 or 40 when you hopefully have half your life left. So I think that was impressed upon myself and my wife, obviously, early on, that, hey, guys, like, let's keep putting it away, so that when you're done playing, you don't have to go do something you don't want to do. If you want to go do something and add on, that's great. But this, your portfolio, whatever you save throughout your career, hopefully will kick off enough that it gives you a bit of a safety net in retirement. And again, I was blessed to have earned more money than I ever could imagine, at that point when I was with you in Winnipeg all those years ago. So that's become a little bit easier. But yeah, it is the foresight. I would get emails from my advisor all the time about like the broke, like the broke series of guys who went bankrupt and spent all their money. And it's a slippery slope, man. It's, you hate to say it, but like, you get used to a certain lifestyle. You get paychecks rolling in at a certain amount, and you kind of live that way. And then all of a sudden they stop or they go down. It's like, oh, we have to make a pretty significant adjustment to our life. And it sounds silly at that level of income, but for anybody, if you're making X amount, all of a sudden it gets cut in half, like you still have to make that adjustment because you've been used to living and spending a certain amount of money to maintain your life. So it is a bit of an awakening for everybody. And, even for us, we had to, make some changes in lifestyle because we can't just keep spending money the way we were when I was at my peak of earning. And we both understand that. And we've been slowly sort of ratcheting down and simplifying our lives because all the extra stuff adds up pretty quickly. So we're getting used to that and totally fine with it. We have everything we need, thankfully. But as you said, Dave, our financial advisor has been a big part of that.
I was going to ask if you had any specifics on that. I know you mentioned like ratcheting down and kind of like, pulling back some of the finances. Like, is there anything specific, like advice-wise, like things that you pulled back going from like playing full-time to now with the NHL Network and that same, income isn't coming in?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds silly, but you play in New Jersey, so we had a house there because I had a long contract with them. We have a lake house in New Hampshire where Jill's family's been forever that we'd spend some summers in, and then we had a house in Boston and where we're both from. So it's like all of a sudden you're maintaining and operating 3 homes, and it's like, okay, we don't need that. We can consolidate that and have the lake house and wherever else we are, something like that. It sounds ridiculous to say out loud for most people, but like that, it's just, you get so used to moving every 9 months. You're at the lake, you're in Boston, you're back to Jersey. It's sort of like, it's just easier to have places to lay your head and rent out and do all that. So, that's one area. And also just like the extraneous expenditures, sometimes things slip between the cracks or, you kind of lose track of memberships or clubs or signups or things you've been doing in different places you live, and all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, I'm paying $200 a month to Equinox in Jersey, and we moved like a year ago from Jersey. Like, let's cut that out, so it's just things you sort of lose track of when you move around so much, because that's the other part. And Dave, like when you're a nomad a bit and you move a lot, it's like easy to lose sight of things. Or, hey, we have 2 places, let's buy one of each for each place, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, can we not do that and just have one that we bring back and forth, or just we don't need it here but we need it there. So it's a bit of a vague or a broad answer, but just sort of like I said, just consolidating and streamlining your life, because again, it's easy to sort of be like, all right, we'll just have one of everything everywhere we live. and then we don't have to worry about it. And all of a sudden you move from one house and shut it down. You're like, oh, now we have like 2 of everything. Can we sell these things? Can we get rid of that? Can we, eliminate this from our lives? And again, as you get older, for me, I'm not as into suits, or, I never was a watch guy, and I never got like those expensive watches a lot of guys got, car wise. Like, all right, do I need this kind of car? Can I just get a pickup truck and be totally fine with that? It's just things like that are somewhat of status symbols when you play, that as you get older and you have a little more perspective, you're like, yeah, I don't need the fancy car. I can just get a, a Jeep and just beat around in that, and I'll be just fine. So, I think your life and perspective changes as you get older as well.
I think I'm still paying for defunct OnlyFans accounts that I signed up for years ago. I don't think they're even active anymore.
Your own or somebody else's?
Mine too, yeah.
Yeah. Don't forget about that.
What was the first thing you bought with your first NHL contract, Corey?
I did buy a car, that 4Runner, Dave, that survived Winnipeg somehow. It didn't have a block heater in it. There were days where I was like, this thing's not going to start.
Tell me you still have it.
Nah, we gave it to my sister-in-law, and I think it hit the couple 100,000 mile point and finally kicked the bucket. But again, just being my father, I had a good signing bonus when I signed, but like I was like, all right, what's a smart, sensible car to get that if I show up at training camp, all the guys won't be like, look at this a-hole with the Range Rover or something like that. So, I bought a Toyota 4Runner, and it was great. It was awesome. I love that car. So that was one thing, and then another was, I think I took a bunch of buddies. Like we would do like kind of guys weekends or whatever. So we rented a house somewhere and just did like a boys trip for all my buddies who sort of were supporting me my whole career. So little things like that. Again, I'm not a big like jewelry watch guy. I'm not into like fancy shoes. Probably bought a few suits just to up my game a little bit from Joseph A. Bank. No disrespect. But yeah, you walk into an NHL locker room and there's certain expectations, like, oh, what are you wearing? Like, why are you wearing that? Or, oh, do you have this yet? And you're like, I don't know. My financial guy told me that when I got my Amex, I was like, what the hell's an Amex? He's like, American Express. I was like, oh, okay, that's what that is. So I was a little naive to some of that. And it's, again, it is a fun, exciting time. And, you do things at that age that you wouldn't normally do. So it's kind of like, all right, have a little fun here, splurge a little bit, but be smart and be sensible and everything in moderation.
Well, I'll tell you, you were smart about spending money on that amazing wedding you had out in Cape Cod. Oh my God, that was a party.
Hey, a lot of people came a long way for that. And I think because we got engaged in April and we didn't want to wait a year plus to get married the following off season. So we were just like, let's just get married this summer. And obviously when you call venues on 3 months notice, there aren't a lot of Saturday dates available in desirable locations. So we found this awesome spot that could do a Friday wedding. So we were like, all right, as penance for making everyone come to Cape Cod on a Friday, which is basically like trying to get to hell and back, we were like, we're just going to open bar it, blow it out, make sure everyone has a great time and have fun and celebrate. So I'm glad you enjoyed it because that was a lot of fun for us. And I know a lot of people, you get so caught up in your wedding, you don't even get to enjoy it. So we got married on a Friday. We did a pool party, lobster bake Saturday with a beach Saturday night, and then the brunch Sunday. So it kind of became a whole weekend affair. And like I said, we just want to make sure everyone had a good time and we're nice and lubed up the whole weekend so they could enjoy it.
I think my favorite point was when I came to you, I was like, so is this a special place for you? Like, did you come here as a kid being a Boston guy? You're like, no, it's the only place that had an available Saturday.
Exactly. We're both north of Boston. You can never get to the Cape from there. So we were mostly New Hampshire and north. So again, it was the only place that could pretty much take us on short notice. And it was great. The venue was awesome. So we had a great time there.
You get a nice little discount too on the Friday wedding compared to the Saturday wedding, right?
Yeah, I think so.
There's that financial planning coming in right there.
Yeah, I'll have to check my receipts to see if that was the case. But yeah, anything you can get at that point.
You're talking about like other guys like being a little bit more flashy with cash. Was there anything like where you felt the peer pressure of, okay, a lot of guys are spending money on this or a lot of guys are investing in that? I think that's maybe not on target with my financial advisors advising, and like maybe you're getting swayed one way or the other?
Nobody put like overt pressure on you. Some guys would come in with like investment opportunities, like, oh, hey, check out my buddy's this. Or like, oh, I got these penny stocks. Or, like, oh, my uncle's got a farm. And it's like, I don't know. It doesn't sound right.
Straight out like Wolf of Wall Street. This is the best thing coming across my desk in the last 6 months, John. You got 2 seconds?
Exactly. And usually it wasn't guys. It was outsiders maybe, or people who like sort of got a hold of you or knew somebody who tried to, figure out if you want to invest in something. Most of them I think were good intention. But even I had good friends who had, who I trusted and liked, but, they had opportunities. I was like, I don't know if that's for me, So, I was pretty conservative with that kind of stuff. But, I think some guys, it's just like they give you a hard time if you're not driving a nice car. We had a kid in Jersey, it wasn't me, but he'd show up in his Honda Accord and my other buddy would be like, hey, man, when you get a new car? He's like, oh, I love my Accord. He's like, oh, I bet you do, but like, when are you going to get a new car? Like, seriously, you're in the NHL, like, get a new car, that kind of thing. So guys were pretty good about it. But, there's one thing when you're younger, especially that Vancouver team I started with, we were an older team. We had a lot of late 20s, early 30s was our core, the Sedin twins, Luongo, Bieksa, Kessler, Ham, Hughes, all those guys, and they were all super generous. So as a young guy, you're in the league, and you're making a good amount of money, but people realize you have taxes, you have escrow, you have agent fees. So if you're, I was making 900,000 my first 2 years in Van, which is a lot of money, but that year it was after the financial collapse, so the escrow was through the roof. So it was like 20% of escrow plus British Columbia taxes plus, so you're clearing about 40% of your paycheck. So it's like, and guys know how expensive Vancouver is. So if you try to live a certain way, yeah, Dave.
Well, Cory, for those that don't know, because I remember the first time you had brought up that word, I had question marks coming out of my ears. Yeah. Explain exactly, for those that don't understand, how escrow works in the NHL.
The simplest way I can say it is that the salary cap every year is based on what they think they're going to make. So going into, say, this season back in September, they say, all right, we project we're going to make $4 billion between TV, ticket sales, all this. And right now we have a 50-50 split between the players and the owners. So basically players get $2 billion of that. So if you take $2 billion, you divide it by 32 teams, that gives you roughly $70 million as your midpoint of your salary cap. And you can go above it by $10 million and below it by $10 million, just for simplicity's sake. So, when they talk about the floor, that's that lower limit, and the cap is the upper limit. So the actual midpoint is 70, but most teams spend to 80. So you're already overspending your budget when you put it that way. So long story short, if you fall short of that, so we're getting paid based on $4 billion in revenue. So if you only make $3.8 billion, say COVID happens, or there's a dip in the market, or the Canadian dollar goes south, and you're not making nearly as much money in Canada, and you make $3.8 billion, well, now the players are only earning 1.9 instead of 2. So there's a $100 million difference you have to make up to the owners to make them whole and make it a 50-50 split. And there's other small things that people, it gets a little boring, but your health insurance goes on the player's share. The buyouts go on our share. Employee insurance goes on our share. So actually, even if we did make $4 billion and the players get 2, there's $100 million in health insurance. There's $100 million in other little costs. So actually our share is 2.2. So we have to pay down that difference to basically make the owners whole. And that's what escrow is. So say you knock it out of the park, say you were in $4.4 billion, you might not owe a dime. Your escrow might be 0. But in some of those early years after the financial collapse, it was like people weren't spending money. We fell way short of our projections. So our paychecks, you're getting 20% taken out. And they always overtake. So like they take out more than they think just to be safe, because they don't want guys writing checks at the end of the season. But so you might get 2 or 3% of that back. Say the economy rebounds or something in the second half's better, you might get 3 or 4% of that back. But at the time, it's pretty shocking. You get taxes, escrow. You're like, oh, that's it. So it's kind of leveled off. When I was playing in Jersey, it was anywhere from 8 to 11%, depending. But the trade-off is, all right, guys, either you take less up front, so like the cap's going to be lower and you're going to make less money. You don't have to pay any of it out, but instead of making $6 million this year, you're making 5.1. Would you rather that, or would you rather make the $6 million and then give some back, and then hopefully, you have a good year and you get to keep it? So the guys always want the money up front. They always say, we'll pay the escrow. We'd rather have the higher cap hit and higher cap numbers, and we'll deal with the rest later. But once you get playing, it sucks to see 15% of your paycheck taken out for escrow. No, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Well, to read the mind of a lot of people who follow this podcast on a regular basis and hearing some of the trials and tribulations of what Travis has gone through in the Federal League, it sounds like it's the exact same situation, just more or less beans on the table and what's being divvied up.
Exactly, and that's why Gary Bettman and the owners are just hard on the cap. Like they will not let you circumvent in any way, shape, or form, because it's dollar in, dollar out type of business. Like there's, they want to get their money obviously, and they've agreed to spend a certain amount on the players, so they don't want you shortchanging them, and that's why you see these escrow fights where if teams aren't claiming money. I think actually Winnipeg was one of the teams for a bit where there was parking revenue somewhere that being accounted for in the league revenue. So the the Players Association, has to go in and audit some of these teams to be like, hey, are you actually counting every dollar that you say you are? Or are you saying, oh, that parking garage is across the street, so the dollars we generated in revenue from that doesn't count? And you're like, no, like that's, it's owned by a shell corporation of the team who it actually goes to the team, So there's a whole bunch of back and forth because we want to make sure we're not getting screwed on our end, that teams are actually claiming the revenue that they're earning. So it is a bit of a cat, dogfight in terms of the owners making sure that they don't owe us, but then them being a little shady themselves. So it's, like I said, it's a whole lot that goes into it that'll make your eyes dry up. But, it's never fun to pay the escrow.
I'm pretty sure that's going to be the next add-on for EA Sports NHL Hockey 2025 is that you can audit other teams in your digital league.
Would you like to manage your escrow? Yes or no? No.
That's so interesting because I can just picture, like, you're talking about like the parking lot, like revenues, like for people parking on game days across the street. Well, it's owned by a company that is owned in Canada, who's also owned by a company in Dubai, who's also owned by our owner, and it's just this shady cycle of, okay, how can we squeeze as many dollars out of here? And I guess as a player, I would assume, whether you're, in my lower ranks or, like at the top where you were, Corey, it's, can I please have my check? Thank you. Can I have some more? I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 for morning skate.
Right. And again, it's, that's why I was so heavily involved in the player association, because it's good to A, be informed and educated and know what's going on, but B, to explain it to other players. Because a lot of guys, they'll get mad about escrow, but then you explain it to them, they're like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. But also you want them to understand like what their rights are, what they're entitled to, what they're deserved. And to your point, a lot of owners, especially before the last lockout in 2012-13, which, it served a big purpose. And again, we had to balance things out a bit, but a lot of them are crying poor. Oh, we're losing X amount. It's like, yeah, but, a lot of those teams were claiming losses to put towards their other businesses that were making a ton of money so they can offset, taxes. So it's almost like taking them out of one pocket and putting it in another. So at the end of the day, these owners, most of them are doing just fine. They'll cry poor, though, publicly to get what they want in negotiations and get sympathy from the fans. But it's also like, are you trying to sell your product as best you can? Are you actually doing everything you can to make the most money you can? And, a loss for you on the Florida Panthers back in the day was fine because you can put that towards your oil company that you own that made a ton of money and you don't have to pay as much taxes. So, again, they weren't wrong in some of their arguments, but it's also like not exactly what it looks like. So that's why some of that distrust between the owners and players existed and still does. We are the product at the end of the day. We're the thing that they have no league without us. So it's kind of like, all right, well, they treat you like an employee, but you're also the product. So it's a weird dynamic that isn't very common in most people's jobs.
And if you keep screwing around, we'll send you to Utah.
Exactly. Do you want to go play in Russia? I didn't think so.
You're actually reminding me of a story that there's a guy that I train with in the summer. He's a good friend of mine. He plays in the ECHL, and he was telling me a story last season, or I guess last summer, about how, like, I guess the team kind of hits him hard on taxes, and he's like, I got this great idea to make a couple extra bucks, Trav. You know what I'm going to do? And I was like, what's that? And he says, well, like, when I report for the season, they pay X amount of dollars in gas, so I just got to give them the receipts, they pay it. So whenever I'm traveling across the country, I fill up every half tank, and I prepay $200, but I only put in 40, and I just keep all the prepaid receipts. And by the time he gets down, because he's making quite a cross-country trip, why did you spend $7,000 in gas? Oh, I was driving a big truck, bad fuel economy. What did you get, 3 miles to the gallon? Yeah.
Especially at the East Coast and those kind of leagues where it really is like your every cent counts. Like those guys, I don't blame them. They're trying to find a way to make a little bit more. But let me tell you, the teams are equally as cheap down there. So they're probably counting every penny as well. Wheeler, to your point, bean counters.
Man, he was also telling me too, like, even at physio, he's like, I was trying to get my physio guy to rep me like a double receipt and then hand that in, like, just working the system.
There was a huge thing with NBA guys, like Big Baby Glenn Davis, and ex-Celtic, a couple of their guys got pinched because they were falsifying medical receipts that they were getting reimbursed for. So like you give your receipt for $8,000 in treatment to insurance and they repay you $8,000, but they weren't actually getting the treatment. They was having doctors forge these. It was like a $2.5 million like medical fraud insurance claim for like these NBA players who should have made enough money. They didn't have to do that. So it still happens even at this level.
Now, a quick word from today's video sponsor, Sheath Underwear. I've been wearing Sheath Underwear exclusively for almost 4 years now, and this is why. Sheath has a dual pouch technology to keep your manly parts separated so they do not stick to the side of your legs, so you can remain comfortable throughout your day. They also have this incredible bamboo cooling mesh, which keeps you very comfortable as well. They're made in the United States and backed by a former member of the U.S. military. Sheath has been the biggest supporter of my hockey career and this channel for the last 2 years, and I cannot say thank you enough. You can pick up a pair of the best underwear money can buy by going to the link in the video description. That'll get you 20% off the best underwear that money has ever bought and ever will, only from the team at Sheath. And thank you to Sheath for sponsoring this video.
Well, it sounds like it's a good thing both of you are keeping each other accountable as far as the audits go, because, it sounds like it can be shady on both sides.
Yeah, exactly. But, at the end of the day, we're most guys will just play. They just want to play, and some of that number stuff. There's certain guys who are like, hey, man, I don't just tell me what I need to know about the union, the player meetings. Like, I just want to play. And then just tell me what I need to know or go do it. Just whatever you think is fine. So you're like, all right, you want everyone to be engaged, but it's hard to get 800 guys on the same page. So you do the best you can.
With the business side of things, I found this very hard to separate the business from the professional fun having side of things. I don't know if that's the proper terminology for it, but you go out, you play morning skate, travel games, etc. But then there's also the side of like, even though your agent is negotiating for you, through the agent what exactly is being said about you and to you, and to like separate that business side of, I guess, the amount of beans on the table that maybe they're being a little bit shysty, and to play, like, what was that like, trying to separate that?
I was pretty fortunate where I didn't have to sign that many deals, and I wasn't ever really a free agent until the end of my career. I came up in Vancouver and got my first contract, and then the only hairy one was that second contract with Vancouver. I came off my $900,000 a year as a backup, and that's when I started playing well. And they signed me to that second bridge deal. It was about 3 years, but it was tricky because they had Roberto. They didn't want to spend too much money on goaltending, but they wanted to keep me. So I looked around the league, and it got down to the wire a bit because they were worried about an offer sheet because I was still restricted on July 1. And we talked about Russia. My agent was kind of like, well, we can always tell them we're going to go to Russia if you don't get what you want. And I was like, oh, yeah, just like bluff and see what they do. And he was just like, oh, I don't bluff. I was like, well, I'm not going to Russia. so don't tell them that. He's like, okay, fair enough. But they were trying to play hardball. They were saying, you're worth this. And I was saying, I don't know, man. Like, look at my numbers. How bad? Look at this guy. Use comparables. And fortunately, my agent did a good enough job, like keep me out of the nitty gritty where it never got contentious. But it came down to, the wire as to when I became a restricted free agent. And we signed my 3-year deal there that I ended up getting traded to. And then I had a year left on my deal. On that deal, when I was in New Jersey, I'd been traded there in the middle of that contract, and Lou signed me to a 7-year extension with a year left on my current deal. So fortunately, I was mostly avoiding of that back and forth, but it definitely does get, you go to arbitration, things are said. And as a player, it is tough when you're chasing your whole career, right? You're chasing. That's what's driving you. And then you get the starting job and you get the big contract. And now it's like, oh, now I'm the hunted. Now guys are coming after me. So it's a different mindset in terms of, not that it's easier, but when you're younger and you're hungry and you're like, all right, I'm going to go take this and I'm going to get there, and whatever, everything I do is about making it. And then you make it in 3 or 4 years into your established career and your money. And it's kind of like, man, this is hard to do year in, year out. And that's why I think you have some guys who don't quite make that transition to become a full-time starting goalie. That's why there's only so many of those guys in the world, because to be good for 50, 60 games nowadays, used to be 60 or 70, year in and year out, when you're so dependent on everything that happens in front of you, it's a real challenge. So, it's almost harder once you get to that point to maintain that level of play, especially as you're getting older, your body's breaking down a bit. You kind of put a different kind of pressure on yourself, and you just sort of have to adjust and learn how to manage and live with that, and just, still be effective while, fending off everybody else who's trying to come take your job.
You mentioned the name Lou in there, and for those that don't know, that's the infamous Lou Lamoriello, who is famously known as a real son of a bitch. And I think you gave the best analogy once upon a time, where you said he's the George Steinbrenner of hockey. And for those that don't know,
Yep.
George, he was the general manager of the New York Yankees, and sideburns can only be by no lower than the lobe on your ear.
Yeah.
Mustaches only, clean shaven. Other than that, short hair. And can you give me, for those that don't know, a little insight on playing for Lou Lamoriello?
Yeah. Mattingly, I thought I told you to shave those sideburns. That's an old Simpsons softball episode reference. Wheeler, you probably got that one.
Oh, no, Trav did too. Believe me, he's just as good as you
All
are
right.
with movie lines.
All right. I love it. Lou is a unique person in the game. I owe him a lot. My family and I owe him both a lot. He's always been loyal. But it's you have to learn how to play for him, because he expects a certain thing. He's got rules, and I think once you get used to that and you understand, he's doing it to see who's going to fall in line. He's going to see he does these things: the short hair, the no facial hair, the time. If you're 5 minutes early, you're late with Lou. The bus will leave. I walked up during COVID when I was with the Islanders, and it was a 3:30 bus, and at 3:23 I walked out of the hotel and the bus is pulling down the street, and I'm like, oh boy, and I actually caught up to it, and he let me on. I was like, of course, the first person I see on the bus is him, and I was like, oh shit. And he looks at me and he's like, I'm sorry, we left too. I was like, oh, okay. He apologized for leaving too early. I was like, whew, that could have gone the other way.
I'm only the lead singer.
Yeah, exactly. At this point, I was not. But yes, once upon a time. But you know what? I think there's certain guys who really appreciate that. There are a lot of guys who they don't want a million fan autograph signing things, season ticket holder events. They don't want the noise and the distraction. That's what Lou does. He tries to limit your distractions. He doesn't make you do a whole bunch of stuff. He doesn't make you go out and, do stuff for the fans and the team. I think as he's gotten older and the league's changed a bit, he's adapted as well. But I think he gives it to you exactly. He tells you what you need to know. And I think some guys appreciate that, because there's certain guys who don't tell you much. You have no idea where you stand with them. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what the expectations are. With Lou, you know exactly where you stand, good or bad. And I think guys prefer that, even if it's bad, than sitting there wondering, like, what does this guy think of me? Does he care? Does he like me? Lou cares. And he's always kind of around. I've never seen a GM who's around as much as he is, but you never know where he is exactly. So it kind of keeps you on your toes a bit, because you could turn a corner in the dressing room, there he is. And you're like, oh, you're just talking shit about the equipment guy or something. And it's like, oh, hey, Lou, what's up? Or you're on the airplane and you're sort of like, he's up there up front. And you're like, all right, well, so he's kind of this like omnipotent, force that I think guys in Jersey when I first got there were like terrified. They would give the old LL, that's the symbol that like Lou's here or like he's coming, or guys legitimately thought the rooms were bugged and video can't like there was a legit paranoia going on amongst the staff and the players that Lou was always watching like Big Brother. And again, it went a little far, not far, but like
he was.
Yeah, exactly. Like he starts saying to them, guys like, like, and sure enough, like there's Lou around the corner. You're like, oh, good thing I didn't say anything there, because guys, that's what guys do. You get together and you BS and you complain and you whine. Like it's just part of the gig out in a long season. But at the end of the day, I have a lot of respect for him because he runs things a certain way and you know exactly where you stand. And he's very loyal. If you're loyal to him and you work hard and you show him that you're all in and that you're bought into what he's pushing and selling, then he will take care of you. Just like he signed me to my big contract in Jersey, and then I signed 3 subsequent deals with the Islanders with him. So I went 10 years of signing contracts with Lou Lamoriello only. So again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can decide, fans and other people. But it was a unique experience. I'm glad I got to, because you do learn stuff from him, because he does have that sort of, he's 81 and he's got this old sort of Italian mobster / Steinbrenner aura to him. And you're like, when this guy speaks, I listen. You're always kind of afraid of what he might say. So it's never a bad thing. Fear is a great motivator sometimes.
Well, I got one more question before Trav jumps in here with some more goalie-centric questions. But you had said towards the tail end of your career when you were kind of up with the Islanders and Bridgeport that you were, and some people maybe took it the wrong way, saying you're kind of done with the American League. You had started with the Manitoba Moose. You'd worked your way up. You had a great career playing in the league. And then when the Bridgeport thing, was that more of a career decision as far as the travel, or was that more of a family decision?
A little bit of both. I think as an athlete, you get to a point where you say like, I've done everything I can here. What else do I have to prove? What else am I going to prove to myself? I think coming off of getting bought out by New Jersey, and then I went the whole COVID year as a taxi squad goalie on the island, and I didn't play. I didn't get a single game that year. I think they were the only team in the league that only used 2 goalies the entire season because everyone got COVID. But I felt better and better as that year went along in practice. I felt like I could play at that level. I felt like I could play in the NHL. So I said, you know what? I want to give it a shot, because I didn't want to go out that way, not having played in, 18 months and being like, what if I could? I was 34, 35. So it's like, you never know. And I just didn't want to not know. So I came back the next year on a 2-way and played a lot in the American League and played well. And the American League's still a good league. It's a tough league because it's not as structured and, predictable as the NHL, especially for a goalie. Things happen that never should happen. And you're like, whoa, that was weird. But, I felt really good about my game. I got the 1 game in against New Jersey and won, which was really cool. Backed up a whole bunch of games. So it was great to be at the NHL level again. And then I did one more year, because I did feel I ended that year. I felt great. We played in the playoffs in the American League. I felt like I could contribute. But again, those 2 Russians on the island, Sorokin and Varley, like they must be hard on the Meldonium or something, because they never get hurt or sick. They play every single night. So I just, again, you never wish anybody to get hurt, but they were so good that I just never really had the opportunity to get a couple of games and see if I could still do it. So that second year in the American League, I got called up. I backed up 8 or 10 games, didn't get in any of them, came back down. And, I think at that point I was 37. I just spent the majority of 2 years in the American League. It's kind of like, all right, do I really need to go back out here and play another year in the American League? Like, what purpose am I serving? Like, that would just be serving my own ego and my own need to play. I've done everything I can here. I just felt at that point, I tried. I wanted to play more in the NHL. I didn't see a future in the NHL at that point, especially. So I sort of said, like, it's just, I don't want to put my family through another season just to satisfy my own competitive needs at 37. Like, I've done that for 16 years. And I think that was a big part of it. So we talked about going to Switzerland. I'm a Swiss citizen, so we could have gone over there and played as a non-import, which would have been pretty cool. But my daughter's going to kindergarten. We had just kind of settled down finally in Fairfield, Connecticut here. We love the community in the area. So, and, I was, at the end of the day too, I think I was just tapped out mentally. I just sort of said, I don't know if I can summon up the energy to go play 30 games in Switzerland next year, riding buses in a foreign country. And while it's been beautiful and fun, it's just, as an athlete, you kind of hit that point where you're just like, all right, I'm good. I've done everything I can here. I just don't know if I can push myself that much anymore.
Is it tough to come to peace with that? Like, to let go of the NHL dream of, okay, I just want to play a couple more games. I want to do this. I want to do that. And just, all right, it's over.
Get a new show, man. It's over. I think because I did those 2 years in the American League, it was easier. I knew my limitations at that point. I still felt like I was a capable goalie. Could I have played 25 or 30 games in the NHL? I don't know. Maybe I could have played some here and there, and we'll see how it went. But and also too, because I played over 400 games, it wasn't as if I got 40 games. It was like, well, what if? I had a great run and a great career in the NHL
and a winning record.
So, again, it's. I know a lot of people who sort of look at the injuries and the downfall and what could have been. But if you had told me back in high school or in Manitoba that I would have played 400 games and, played for Vancouver and New Jersey and done all these things I did, I would have taken that in a heartbeat. So I try to look at it as positive, and I had a great experience with it. And again, to your point, I think those years in the American League were sort of, again, cathartic for me to just be like, okay, I tried. I did everything I could. There wasn't much else I could have done, so I'm at peace with it. Again, if I left something on the table or been like, maybe I could have done this, then it would have been a little bit harder. But I think, again, it really let me exhaust that scratch that itch of can I still do it and do I want to still do it? And I think that allowed me to, and my family allowed me to do it too, because the American League is, it's better in some ways, but it's worse in others. My kids, when we go to games now, they're like, when are we going to the family room between periods? It's like, oh, buddy, dad doesn't play anymore on that team. We can't just show up in the family room. So, but we had a great experience with it. So again, like I said, I'm completely at peace with it.
Which guys come to mind, like playing day in, day out for how many years? You see some of the best in the world. I mean, you're already a top 60 goalie as is, but are there any guys that come to mind where you're just overwhelmingly impressed by them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Roberto to me was kind of like, I think he changed my career in a good way without him even knowing it. I think I came in from Manitoba and I had some great mentors down there, Drew McIntyre, some of the other guys I worked with and played with, Scott Arneal, our coach, Mike Keane, Keener. Like, he taught me so much in the American League about how to be a pro and how to be an adult and just sort of, hey, suck it up and just, you're a pro now. You got to do certain things. So those guys really helped me in the minors. But then when I got to Vancouver, it's a different level. It's a different level of scrutiny, different level of play. And I think for me, thinking I was ready, and I felt I was, and I get on the ice with him, and he's out there before me. He's doing drills. He's working on this. He's competing on every single puck. He's swearing up and down the ice if he gets scored on. Like, he's a competitive son of a bitch. And I was like, oh, that's what like great goalies look like at this level. So I think even just to observe him and watch him and practice with him for that first half of that season, it ramped my game up. I was like, okay, this is the level I need to get to if I'm going to compete with this guy, because one of my biggest fears was like, and I felt this when I had been called up in the years prior, that there was Roberto, and I didn't want to be the guy that came in and they're like, oh, you're not Roberto. Like, we don't feel secure and safe with you back there because we have one of the greatest goalies of all time in net. So honestly, that fear motivated me to try to be as good as I could as him, to make sure there wasn't like some significant drop off between him and me when I did play. And I think the work ethic, the mentality, the competitiveness, not even the talent, let alone that, it was just that helped me sort of get to that next level. And yeah, I mean, he's the one that probably stands out the most. I've had some other great, recently, even in the island, working with Ilya Sorokin and Varley. Varley was one of my peers, Semyon Varlamov. We were compared a lot. I actually based the contract negotiator I was talking about. He was the comparable we were looking at, because he had just re-signed with Colorado. So it was fun working with those two, because Ilya is just, a maniac. He works so hard and he cares so much. And Varley's just, he's been around forever, and he's just so technical. You see him in the playoffs now. He's still doing it at 35, 36. Just a really fun guy, but again, works his butt off at age 35, 36 to be in the shape he is. Jersey was a little different. I had Marty for a year, so that was a bit of a unique experience. It was awesome playing with Marty, just again, to be around him and watch him. I probably didn't learn quite as much from him just because he had such a unique style, and he was 42, so he's just at a different point of his career. And then, we had, once I became a starting goalie, we ran through a lot of backups. All great guys, Keith Kincaid, Scott Clemenson, Jan Denis, just guys like that, Mackenzie Blackwood. So I always had great relationships, but it kind of flipped at that point, right? I sort of became the mentor to the mentee versus the other way around. So again, as I mentioned, you're the hunted, so you're trying to keep your job and prove that you belong, but you're also trying to teach these guys and help them come along in their careers while still making sure that you're doing what you need to do. So, again, I was pretty lucky to have good goaltending partners in my career.
I've always found, like, no matter what goalie partner you have, you end up absorbing some of the tendencies that they have just from seeing it day in, day out. I mean, you see them on the ice how many times over how many seasons, how many years. Was there anything specific that you absorbed from like a Varley or from a Sorokin or from a Lou?
Yeah, I mean, Roberto, I morning skated every day because he did. He always morning skated. Even though he played 60, 65 games, he always went on the ice in the morning. And so I felt like if I didn't morning skate, I wasn't going to play well. Like, I had to see shots in the morning. And then finally, when I got to Jersey years later and was the guy, there was one year I played 69 games. Finally, Chris Terreri, my goalie coach, had to be like, hey, man, you don't have to skate. We played yesterday. Like, you really don't have to skate. I'm like, no, I do. Like, I have to skate. And he's like, trust me, don't go on the ice, because, it takes you an hour to warm up, stretch, get ready, put your gear on. You go on the ice for 12 minutes and you get off. Like, save yourself the energy of doing all that and whatever. And finally, I did. And I was like, oh, I played all right. And I was like, oh, I guess I don't have to skate every day, every morning. So it took a little while from Roberto to like, get out of my mind that I had to do that. Mostly just like a little equipment things too. There's some warm up drills, some skating drills I picked up from guys along the way, but like I wore these elbow kind of soft, squishy elbow heel pads that I stole from Roberto because I saw him doing it. I was like, oh, I'm going to try that. And I did that up until like the end of my career. Skates, I couldn't get out of the old cowling skates. Like I finally just recently got into those ski boot, the Bauer Connect with I got into those like the last year of my career. But prior to that, I had to wear those like big cowling skates that the blades wouldn't come out of because I just was so used to them. I couldn't go to 3 mm steels because it felt like I was on stilts. Like I had to have the 4 mm width, which again, you say it's a millimeter, but still 25-30% of, more width. So just little habits, you're getting old when they stop making your equipment. Like I called Vaughn and they're like, man, we don't do the shin cradle anymore. Like you and Quickie are the only two guys who still use that. Like, can you get in some of the new stuff? I'm like, well, you're making it for Quickie. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, can you make it for me? And they're like, fine. Some poor bastards like still sewing in shin cradles for me and Quickie. So just little things like that. You just realize the games, you gotta get lighter and faster as you get older. And I tried to adopt that as much as I could, but there're just certain things you have a hard time, habits kicking.
Yeah, if it makes you feel any better, I'm still using cowlings. I mean, I just put cowlings on my Connect skates 2 years ago, so dinosaurs still live.
That's right. Yeah, you get it.
Well, I actually have one question for you, one more gear one before Dave asks a couple more questions, but you were always a Vaughn pad, Lefevre glove kind of guy. Was there a reason behind that? Or I'm assuming somebody offered you some big cash to go exclusive Vaughn or Lefevre or something along the lines.
You would think so. Not really. I never liked Vaughn gloves. They felt too flimsy, or I just could never get the break right. I just felt like pucks would break through them. I just couldn't hang on to them well. I just love the stability and sturdiness of the Lefevre blocker and glove, but I love the flexibility and the bend and the give of the Vaughn pads. Like I hated for a long time, I thought the CCMs and those were just way too stiff. I had no feeling at my ankles to like get on and out of my post. So, Vaughn offered me a little bit of money when I was in Vancouver. But again, my agent sort of, Mike Liut, who was a goalie and a really good one. So he helped me a lot in my career in terms of just dealing with the mental side of goaltending. He's like, hey, you'll make more money stopping pucks than you will wearing equipment. So just wear what's comfortable, wear what you like, and trust me, you'll make more if you do well than you will wearing gloves for $10,000 a year that you hate 5 games into the season. So I just took that to heart, and I never had the best style because of that. I was a bit of a mutt all over the place.
I thought the style was great, dude. The V3s, the Vaughn V3s, and the Reebok P3s, that was a great set.
Well, I appreciate that, yeah. But the Warrior stick, the Bauer bucket, the CCM gloves, and the Vaughn pad was like a walking billboard. It's like, anybody want to give me anything? And I got a little bit from each of them at times, but I never cashed in or made a lot of money like some other guys did going head to toe. But again, I think I more than made up for it in my play and my contract. So I'll take that trade all day.
You ever seen that meme of that girl on TikTok? She's like, help me, I'm poor.
I have not. I'm not a big TikTok guy. I'm not going to lie, but I've probably seen something like that somebody's shown to me.
I could sit here and reminisce about the Calder Cup finals down in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I could reminisce about, a lot of things that happened in our core set of memories that we have together, Cory, over your time in Manitoba. But just honestly, watching you throughout your career, staying in touch as much as we have, and now watching this transition that you've made, man, I said it off the air, but I couldn't be prouder. I'm happy to see your smiling face on NHL Network and the podcast that you and Boyle got together. Like you said, you talked a little bit about that relationship. Can you, as Sean Evans from Hot Ones would say, this camera, this camera, this camera. Tell people what you got going on in your life.
Well, I love Hot Ones, actually. My wife was trying to get me on that show for a while, too, but I was like, I don't know if they're doing, NHL goalies these days, but we watched.
Maybe back in the dark ages of Hot Ones, back in the first 3 seasons, sure.
Yes, exactly. I give her credit, though. She tried, and she's willing to do that kind of stuff for me. But, you know what? It's funny, as you said that, because, Winnipeg always has a soft spot for me. Starting there, growing up there a little bit, learning how to play. I thought it was an awesome place as an American leaguer to play because it felt like an NHL market, NHL building. Mark Chipman, Craig Heisinger, like they were NHL caliber people and owners and management. So, Winnipeg to me, playing in that Calder Cup final at home with the whiteout, I watch it now with the Jets, and I'm like, I remember what that was like back with the Moose. So I feel like I grew up a lot in Winnipeg, and it really did prepare me for playing in Vancouver in the NHL. So, like I said, I always have a soft spot for Winnipeg in my heart. And yeah, this podcast, it's just, me and Bry, he's a big, gregarious guy. He's smart in ways that I'm not. And he's got unique perspectives. He's one of 13 kids from an Irish Catholic family in Boston. And we played together in college for 3 years. We played in Jersey when he got diagnosed with leukemia. So our families got really close together. Our kids are the same age. So we've always just had these conversations because he's not afraid to say it like it is. He's one of the few people who just says what he thinks and he'll tell me or just call me out. And I think I can check him in that way too. So I just think we have a funny banter. It's like, Stadler and Waldorf in the Muppets. We're up there in the balcony, kind of like giving each other crap, but also like pointing out stuff. So we just have these like sessions in the locker room where we just go on these rants or just start talking about stuff that bothered us. And, we're kind of like like an old married couple, but, he knows the game really well. He played for 15 years as a middle six, bottom six kind of guy because he could think the game and do all the stuff that nobody wanted to do. And so I just think we have a good discourse in terms of me kind of facilitating and sort of poking and prodding him and him sort of giving his view on it. So it's fun. It's kind of pop culture like you. We talk a lot about, I ranked my favorite adult cartoons the other day just because I was like, you know what? I like adult cartoons. Here's my top 5. And he sort of was like, all right, here we go. I guess he's going to do it. He's sort of not into that.
Where did Rick and Morty slot into that? Where did Rick and Morty land on the top 5?
I put in 3. I put Simpsons 1 just because of what it meant for the future of cartoons. I did Family Guy 2 just because it's been around forever and it's been pretty funny throughout. I did Rick and Morty 3 because I do love that show. I think it's the best new one out there. South Park 4 just because it, again, broke a lot of barriers. And then I had a tie for 5th with American Dad and, the hell's it called? Now I can't think of it. What's the Nick Kroll one on Netflix? The middle
Brain. Big Mouth. Yeah.
I think that show's really funny. I think Maury the Hormone Monster is one of my favorite characters of all time.
Well, listen, I always give Travis crap for quoting as many movie lines as he does on this show, but every time he does, I think of you because you guys have the same mind where you just have this photographic memory where you see something, that's funny, and then you place it in the memory bank. It's incredible.
Imagine if I could use all that space for something more important than just movie lines. It'd be.
What did I say to you? I said the exact same thing to you.
Well, that's a lie, Dave. You said if you spent the amount of time you do memorizing moving quotes and the stopping pucks, maybe we'd have a more successful career. And I said, all right, you're right. You're not wrong, Dave.
I was able to do both for a little while, so it is possible.
Well, listen, Trav, anything else you want to pick the brain out? Because there's only one thing I got left to ask as far as the career. Starting off in the media the way you do, I find it very interesting that you're doing the podcast, and I wonder if you equate podcast with morning skate the way you do for the podcast going into the NHL Network. And can you see this building anywhere else as far as do you want to be, Juice or Kevin Bieksa on Hockey Night in Canada?
Yeah.
Is this a launching pad for something else, or are you kind of happy where you are now?
Well, it's tough because, from what I've found, TV networks are very hard to tell what they're thinking or doing. Like I had something I thought that was lined up for this season to do some more like in booth sort of, color analysis that they'd, I won't name it who it was, but all summer they're like, yeah, we're interested. We'd love to have you for at least part of the season. And then come August, I'm like, hey guys, like, I'm not trying to push you, but I got to figure my shit out. Like I have a life to worry about come September. Like, am I doing this or not? Like, yeah, we'll get back to you. And they just never got back to me. September rolls around. You're like, okay, I guess they just forgot or just didn't care to get back to me. And even with the Islanders, I did about 6 or 8 games for the Islanders, like the in between the benches or the in between periods, pregame, postgame stuff. And that stuff's interesting. I kind of like the in-game stuff because you have to think on your feet, you're reading and reacting. And it was a great experience, but who knows? It's like I haven't talked to them since the season's ended, so there's only so many jobs. That's the thing. It's like there's only so many spots available. There's 64 broadcast guys in the league, and 32 more analysts. And in terms of these national shows, TNT, ESPN, you never know. So you try to get as much out there on tape as you can, and maybe somebody will call. And I don't know, maybe I'm not being as proactive as I should be about it yet because I just don't know if that's the avenue I want to go in. But it is something that would be interesting. And again, especially in the in-game kind of stuff, to me is more exciting and fun. The NHL Network's great. I like doing it. I think the NHL Now show was fun because you have more creativity and freedom. But I would like to explore more on a team basis. But then again, it's a pretty big commitment. You're basically going back into an NHL schedule of 82 games. You're gone for 100 nights a year. Is that something I'm really interested in at this point while the kids are still 6 and 8 and at that age where a lot's happening? So, just trying to work through it and figure it out with my wife and kind of do what's best for us.
Well, as far as your podcast goes, this is where I'm curious, like where you begin, because there's such a market for podcasts. I was talking with Cam Jansen a couple months ago, and we're talking about, okay, like what makes a great hockey podcast? Well, I can think this makes my show the best, and he can think this makes his show the best, but at the end of the day, you're just a victim to the algorithms, and the algorithms will decide, who gets pushed out to where and who gets pushed out to what. I'm curious, like, where do you go? Because you're going from, I don't have a podcast, I don't have anything, me and Brian are going to start the show. How do you kind of like slot yourself in, figure out what you want to do moving forward? Because I listened to the show this morning. You guys' intro is awesome, and you only started in November of 23. It was a very good listen, by the way.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. And again, one of his buddies from home is the producer, so he's helping us out with it. We're really trying to keep it bare bones for now because we don't necessarily want to invest a ton of money into it until we know it might be a viable thing. You don't want to put thousands and thousands of dollars into it and then have it just, be nothing. So we're trying to slowly build it organically. But to your point, we're having to change the way we do things because not many people download and listen to full episodes anymore. They get the quick clips on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, and they see the 2-minute hit of something, and that's what they consume and that's what they like. So, we're trying to provide something different that's not Chicklets because they have that market dominated. Same with Missing Curfew. A couple of these bigger podcasts. We're not trying to be like and I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but sort of that bro culture of, offensive, sort of vulgar, which is still funny. It's still a great listen, but we're trying to make it more maybe tailored to hockey parents and dads that they can listen to in their car with and still laugh and relate to us in a everyday level. Like we're all, Wheeler's a dad and like, you get what it's like to be a dad sometimes. So we sort of riff on that or retirement, some of the stuff we're talking about, what it's like, or give a behind the scenes look as to, hey, here's actually what happens on a game day, or this is what we do, or just try to give some insight. Cause I think that's what a lot of everyday fans sort of crave is that behind the scenes kind of stuff that they don't know about. And you're like, oh, I had no idea that, guys do this to their sticks before every game, or that this is how the equipment stuff, where like you said, like as a goalie, you're into like the equipment kind of stuff. So we're trying to just explore all of it. Well, kind of almost like The Ringer, like a pop culture, but hockey centric podcast that talks about adversity and perseverance and getting to where you want to be and how you deal with failure and how this generation coming up is going to handle those things, whereas Brian and I had to push through some things to get to where we got to. So it's a little bit of everything, but again, at the end of the day, I think we have good chemistry and a good rapport, so hopefully, like I said, it's a fun listen for people too. It's not too dry where you're just sort of like, all right, click. I want to turn that off.
Well, son of a bitch, sounds like you and I are going after the same audience.
We're south of the border. You're double south and north of the border.
Yeah, right, exactly. Trav, anything else before we let this wonderful gentleman go?
Oh, I haven't even touched my questions. We can go for another hour if you let me, by the way, Cory.
We'll have to do a follow-up episode.
Well, one last thing I'll leave out there. It's so interesting because I found, like, through podcasting and through vlogging, to be successful, you have to be the best at something, the first or the most unique. And you mentioned, like, Chicklets being the first, the most unique, the best. Like, they have absolutely exploded. They're a juggernaut. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, that you'll never touch it. And like just for like our full length show, to get people to watch a 10-15 second clip, and like we do new clips every single day, like on the social media channels, and some of them will hit 10, 15, 50, 100, 200, like 2 million views a clip. But then to get somebody to watch that like 10-second clip and to purposely go watch a 45-minute episode, it's such an investment and a hard ask. It's like, that's the $1 million question. How do you get somebody to watch that little clip and then buy into the full show, and then to be relatable enough or to evoke an emotion out of them to say, I'll come back for another one. This was nice. I'll come back for round 2. And then every single week, it's tough. It's a challenge. I would argue, too, like doing that with podcasting has been like the hardest thing in my entire career. And trust me, I've had a hard time making it in goaltending. Barely. Podcasting's even harder.
Yeah, it is. It is, again, a challenge. And again, we're not so worried about the end game yet. I think both of us have always talked about it. So this is more of just like a hobby or project for us at this point. And to your point, it keeps me engaged. Because again, if I do NHL Network once or twice a week, I wouldn't watch a lot of hockey necessarily this year if I wasn't doing that to stay up to date on my job and to talk about the podcast. So I think for me, it helps me stay involved in the game because it changes so rapidly. I went on the first day of the year, I think the season opener on NHL Now, and they put the Chicago Blackhawks lineup up because they were playing Bedard against Crosby opening night. I was like, I don't know who 7 of those guys are in that lineup. Like, never heard of them, So obviously they have a young rebuilding team, but like the game can pass you by pretty quickly if you don't stay involved with it. So again, I think this is perfect for me to stay engaged and understand what's happening in the league without having to be like fully immersed in it every single day and do that for a living. So again, I think after, we're seeing how it goes, but hopefully we can set it. The odds are probably against it, but for now we're enjoying it, having fun. We're not investing a ton of money into it. So it's just kind of like, all right, we'll see where this goes. And if it looks like it has some promise, we'll maybe, keep attacking it. But otherwise, like I said, we're just enjoying it ourselves.
And I got one last one before I let you go. This is something that me and Dave were talking about before we started recording the show, but I've never seen this touched on by any of like the mainstream media or whatnot. But your relationship with Jonathan Quick, I mean, you guys were both playing NCAA Division I, UMass, Boston. You come up, you're drafted very similarly, and I think the 2004 draft, U.S. World Juniors, the American League, you play, Kings, Canucks, 2012 first round playoffs, Kings, Canucks. Like, what was that relationship like, being two incredible American goalies and competing?
It's funny because we actually played against each other in prep school. I went to Phillips Academy and he went to Avon Old Farms. We ran into each other in the semifinals of the New England prep school. And his team was a wagon. He had a really good team and he was lights out. So like, I think we got smothered like 4-1 by his team in the semi. So that's where we first ran into each other. And as you said, in Hockey East playoffs, we didn't see each other in the American League, but then NHL playoffs. So we were always kind of peers in that sense and similar. He's from Connecticut. I'm from Boston. So, yeah, I always admired him. I've always, enjoyed his game because he does it his own way. He does it differently. I feel like you see so many cookie cutter goalies today that you don't really have the flair and the style of the Jonathan Quicks anymore. And the way he's still playing today, it's like knowing how hard it is for me personally, like it's been incredible to watch him. And the funny thing is, like he and I don't know each other that well. Like we've played against each other and we've sort of crossed paths, but I think the only team we played on together was the World Cup team in 2016 when they did that little Fracocta World Cup in Toronto. So that's the only time I've really shared the locker room with him. So, whenever we see each other, we talk and catch up and shoot the shit, but like, we're not like best buddies in that sense. We have a lot of similar friends and people in common, but, again, he's a pretty quiet guy. He kind of stays to himself a lot too. But, again, I think it's just where American goaltending's come from since I started. It's crazy how good the American goalies are. And it's just nice that he and I were a part of that trend and hopefully part of that movement to get more young American kids into the position.
Do you ever see the comfort food recipes he used to post on Twitter? This is like right before like he cracked the NHL lineup. Do you remember that or no?
No, I don't actually. Like I said, I'm not a huge social media guy, so that's maybe part of it too.
I think I was like 13 or 14 at the time. I remember him on Twitter, like him and his wife Jacqueline, like they'd be making like a Tostitos bowl, of, like chili or nachos, whatnot. And he'd post sometimes maybe videos, but mostly photos, be like, chili, watching the Jets game or, whatever. It was so interesting. He's not on social media anymore, but I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he's a pretty simple guy, I think, in that sense. So it's funny that he does that because, again, I think he does have a good personality, but again, he's a pretty low key guy. So I'd have to go check those out or dig those up.
If you haven't checked out the podcast yet, please do. We'll put a link to it down in the podcast description. Cory Schneider, always a pleasure, sir. As we talked off the air, you and I need to catch up away from the cameras and microphones. Let's make sure we do that soon.
We will. We'll do a proper one after this.
And thanks for listening to Sling the Biscuit. Thanks to our sponsors for making everything possible. We do new episodes every single Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's 10 a.m. in the prairies in downtown Winnipeg, 9 a.m. in Alberta, in the foothills in the prairies, 8 a.m. in the Pacific Northwest Coast. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening.